Montana Territory, September 1882. The wind had teeth that night, sharp and cold as it cut through the cracks in the old barn boards. Dust swirled low across the floor, catching in the lantern light. That was when Dallas Keene saw her curled up in the hay with a baby pressed tight against her chest, both of them shivering beneath a threadbare quilt. He stepped back once, thinking maybe he had come across a ghost. But she shifted, lips parted with a breath, and the baby stirred against her. Flesh and blood. Real. "That's no place for either of you," Dallas said, voice low as he stepped further in, boots crunching over old straw. The woman's eyes flew open. She sat upright fast, clutching the baby to her. "Do not come closer," she said, her voice raspy from cold or crying, maybe both. Dallas held up both hands. "I will not hurt you. Just did not expect anyone to be sleepin' in my barn." The baby whimpered and she hushed him quick, rubbing his tiny back. The child could not have been more than 6 months old, blue eyes blinking up into the lantern light. The woman looked about 20, maybe a little older, her face drawn from exhaustion but still strong in that quiet, stubborn way Dallas had seen in people who had lost too much. "I did not mean to trespass," she said. "I just needed somewhere warm." Dallas kept his distance but crouched down, resting his forearms on his knees. "You got a name?" She hesitated, then said, "Clara Monroe." He nodded. "I am Dallas Keene. This is my place. That quilt is not going to keep you or the baby from freezing tonight. I can manage." "No, you cannot." His voice was calm, but certain. "Come inside. I have a fire going and stew on the stove." Clara clutched the baby tighter. "I do not take charity." "It is not charity," Dallas said. "It is decency." She stared at him for a long time, weighing things. Her eyes flicked past him to the open barn door, the dark beyond, the cold. Finally, she stood. "His name's Jonah," she said, adjusting the blanket around the baby. Dallas nodded and stepped to the side, letting her pass him. He stayed a few paces behind her as they walked through the yard toward the cabin. The wind cut through his coat, but it was nothing next to what she must have felt in that barn. The fire inside was small but steady. Clara stepped in slow, like she was afraid the walls might close in. The warmth hit her and she stopped, eyes fluttering shut for a second. "Sit," Dallas said, pulling out a chair. "You look half dead." She sat, holding Jonah close, rocking him gently. Dallas grabbed a bowl and ladled out stew from the pot on the stove. He set it in front of her, then filled one for himself. They ate in silence, the only sound the baby's soft breathing and the crackle of the fire. When she finished, Clara set the spoon down and said, "Thank you. You got somewhere you are headed?" She shook her head. "Nowhere left to go." "You got family?" She stared into the fire. "Had a husband, James. He was a blacksmith back in Kansas. Died last winter. Fever took him in 3 days. His folks turned me out after the funeral. Said they could not keep another mouth around." Dallas felt something tighten in his chest. "And you just came west?" "I heard there was work in Dillon, but by the time I got here, the ranch hands had already taken every job worth having. I ran out of money a week ago." "You been sleeping in that barn all week?" "Last 4 nights." Dallas stood and poured water from the kettle into a tin basin. "Let me take Jonah for a minute. You wash up. Looks like you haven't had a chance in a while." Clara blinked at him, unsure. "You can watch me the whole time," Dallas said. "I will just hold him." After a moment, she nodded and slowly handed Jonah over. Dallas took the baby with practiced hands. He bounced him gently and walked back and forth near the hearth, and Clara watched every step. She scrubbed her face and hands with the warm water, then sat down again, looking 10 years younger without the dirt and worry caked on her. "You have children?" she asked. "No," Dallas said. Had a younger sister. Raised her after our folks died. She passed 2 years back. Diphtheria. Clara looked down at Jonah. Seems like everyone's lost someone. Dallas handed Jonah back. You can stay here. Just until you get your feet under you. I do not want to be a burden. You are not. Her eyes searched his face. Why would you do this? Because nobody helped my sister when she needed it. I still think about that. Clara looked away, her jaw trembling a little. Dallas stepped back, giving her space. There is a bed in the loft. I will sleep down here tonight. She hesitated, then whispered, Thank you. That night, after Clara climbed the ladder with Jonah sleeping in her arms, Dallas sat by the fire, staring into the flames. He did not know what drove him to bring her in. Maybe it was the way she held that baby like her whole life was wrapped up in one tiny bundle. Maybe it was the look in her eyes, worn out but not broken. He had not felt anything stir in him for a long time. Not since before the war. But something about Clara Monroe made the silence inside him feel a little less wide. Upstairs, Clara lay in the bed, Jonah curled beside her. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside and the soft crackle of the fire below. For the first time in weeks, she was warm. And for the first time since James died, she did not feel entirely alone. The first pale light of morning crept through the cabin window, catching on the steam rising from the kettle. Dallas had already been outside, splitting kindling with steady swings and feeding it to the stove until the room was warm enough that Clara didn't stir from the loft with her shoulders hunched. She came down the ladder slow, one arm cradling Jonah, the other braced against the rungs. You sleep? Dallas asked without turning from the stove. Clara nodded, adjusting Jonah against her chest. Some. He poured a ladle of hot water into a tin mug and passed it to her. It's just boiled water, but it'll ease the chill. She took it, warming her fingers against the sides. Jonah blinked at the room, quiet and watchful. Dallas noticed how the boy tracked movement already, calm like his mother. I have a milk cow, Dallas said after a moment. She's steady. You can take what you need for him. Clara's fingers tightened on the mug. She looked at Dallas, then out the window, where the frost hadn't yet lifted from the grass. I can help earn my way, she said. I know how to mend, patch boots, even straighten a fence line if it's needed. You'll find no shortage of work here, he said. But I don't ask anything from you that you're not ready to give. I'm not afraid of work, she said. Her voice was quiet, but the way she squared her shoulders spoke louder. He nodded once. Then we'll start with the barn. I need help sorting the tack room. Tack's all out of order since the storm last month. She shifted Jonah to her hip. I'll need something to lay him in. Dallas gestured toward a wooden crate near the hearth. Lined it with wool yesterday. It's clean. He'll rest easy. Clara stepped over and knelt, checking it herself. She laid Jonah in slowly, tucking the blanket around him, then brushed her hand over his fine hair. When she straightened, she looked different, less guarded, though her mouth still held tension. They walked out side by side. The sun was starting to warm the frost off the fence rails, and the horses in the paddock tossed their heads when they saw them. The barn doors creaked as Dallas pushed them open, and the smell of leather, hay, and old earth rolled out. Clara worked quietly, hands practiced. She didn't ask where things belonged, she studied the patterns and figured it out. Dallas watched from the corner of his eye, testing her pace against his own. She didn't slow, didn't complain when the dust caught in her throat or when her fingers reddened from cold leather. You ever work horses? He asked, lifting a saddle down from the wall. James had a mare, she said, brushing cobwebs from a harness. She was mean as anything, kicked him once hard enough to crack a rib. I learned to keep clear or calm her down. Dallas chuckled, the sound low and brief. "Sounds like you held your own." "I did what I had to." Her tone wasn't bitter, just plain-spoken. They worked until the sun was high enough to cast long, golden bands across the floor. Clara wiped her brow with her sleeve and leaned against the stall gate. "You learned this from your father?" she asked, nodding toward the neat row of bridles. "No," Dallas said. "He died when I was 12. I hired on with a cattle outfit out of Bozeman. Learned everything from a wrangler named Silas who could tie a bridle blindfolded." Clara looked around the barn, then back at him. "Seems you made a life out of it." He didn't answer right away. "It's quiet. I can live with quiet." She gave a small nod. "Quiet's not always bad." When they stepped back into the cabin, Jonah was still asleep, one hand curled by his cheek. Clara crouched beside the crate and touched his back lightly, as if to reassure herself. Dallas stirred the stew pot and ladled some into 2 bowls. They ate without speaking for a while. Then Clara set her spoon down. "Why didn't you sell this place after your sister passed?" Dallas looked at the fire. "I thought about it. But she's buried out back, beneath the birch tree. Didn't feel right to leave her here alone." Clara didn't reply right away, but her shoulders eased a little. "I buried James under an oak," she said at last. "Back of his folks' farm. They let me dig the grave but wouldn't let me stay to see it filled." Dallas looked over at her, and for a moment, neither of them moved. "You're not alone here," he said. She held his gaze, steady and quiet. Then she nodded once, as if accepting something that hadn't needed to be said. Outside, the wind had stilled. Inside, the fire kept on, and Jonah slept with his tiny hand curled in peace. By the 3rd morning, frost still clung to the fence rails, but the shape of autumn had softened. Clara stood outside with Jonah in a sling across her chest, a half-woven basket of damp linens at her feet. She wrung out the last shirt over the washboard and hung it on the line Dallas had hammered between 2 posts. Her hands ached from the cold water, but it was a clean ache, one that came from doing something that mattered. Dallas was at the far end of the pasture, mending a bent gate hinge with a quiet focus she'd come to recognize. He worked with that same steady patience whether it was a broken fence or a skittish colt. Clara watched him for a breath longer than she meant to, then turned back to the basket. "Wind's picking up from the west," he said when he reached her, wiping his palms on a rag. "Storm'll skirt us, but might bring snow on the ridgelines." She studied the sky. "I've never known a place where the weather could change in a blink. It teaches you to pay attention," he said, nodding toward Jonah. "You've got a good eye for it already." They walked toward the cabin together, her steps slowed by the weight of the sling and the ache in her legs. Inside, the room held a warm hush. Jonah stirred, then settled his cheek against her. She moved to the hearth and shifted him onto the pallet Dallas had built from scrap wood and wool stuffing the day before. "I've been thinking," Dallas said, leaning one shoulder against the doorframe. "There's a family north of here, the Clarys. Got 3 little ones and another on the way. Their eldest's near 10 but half wild. I reckon they'd pay fair for someone to look after the house while the missus rests." Clara sat at the table and reached for her needlework. "You think they'd take to a stranger? They trust me, and they'll trust you once they see how you carry yourself." She glanced up, thread between her fingers. "You're sure? I wouldn't offer it if I wasn't." She worked in silence for a beat, then said, "If I earn something steady, I could buy cloth for Jonah come winter. And maybe a proper blanket." "You'll have what you need," he said. "But you'll feel better knowing you earned it. I know the feeling." Clara tied off her thread. "I don't want to stay idle. I've done enough of that, waiting for things to change." Dallas leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "You're not someone who waits. You walked halfway across the territory with a baby on your hip. That tells me everything I need to know. Her mouth tightened, not in pain, but with the weight of being seen. I didn't have a choice. Doesn't make it less brave. Jonah let out a soft noise in his sleep, and Clara rose to adjust the blanket over him. Dallas didn't speak, and she didn't need him to. The quiet between them had started to feel like something solid, not empty. Later that afternoon, Clara sat on the porch steps, patching a frayed hem while Jonah napped inside. Dallas came from the barn with a bundle of fence wire over his shoulder. He stopped by the porch rail, watching the thread move between her fingers. "You do that neat," he said. "I had to learn early. My mother worked long hours. I kept the clothes from falling apart." He set the wire down and sat on the bottom step, elbows resting on his knees. Where was home? Outside Salina. Flatland. Windy every season. We had a well that tasted like iron, and the kitchen window looked out on a cottonwood that never leafed right. He rubbed his jaw. Funny how certain things stick. I used to think if I ever made it west, I'd never miss those plains. But I do. Not the place, really. Just the knowing of it. He nodded, slow. I miss the sound of my sister humming when she cooked. It's the little things. She looked at him then, not with pity, but with something closer to understanding. "You want to show me how to fix a hinge?" she asked. He raised his brows slightly. "You want to fix hinges now?" "I want to learn something new," she said, setting the fabric aside. "You said you could tie a bridle blindfolded. Teach me something useful." He stood and offered a hand. "All right then, let's find something to break." They walked to the shed together, the sun slanting low behind them. The shadows stretched longer, but the space between them grew shorter. Neither said anything for a while, and that, too, felt right. Inside the shed, he handed her a wrench and pointed to a door that groaned every time it swung. She knelt beside it, and he crouched beside her, showing her where to place the tool, how much to tighten, how to listen for the sound that meant it was set just right. "There," he said. "Try it." She pushed the door open. It moved smooth as cream, her face lit with quiet satisfaction. "That's not so hard. You've got a good hand for it." She rose and dusted her palms. "You keep saying that, because it keeps being true." She held his gaze longer than she had before. Then, without another word, turned and walked back toward the house, her shoulders straighter than when the day began. Dallas watched her go, the scent of pine sap and iron in the air. He didn't move right away. There was something about her, the way she took to things without complaint, the way she asked for nothing but gave her full self to every task, that made the ache in his chest ease, just a little. The lantern light spilled through the cabin window as dusk settled in, and for the first time in a long while, the place felt lived in. Not just occupied, but tended to by hands that knew loss but still reached forward. And as the wind shifted through the trees, Dallas knew. He wasn't just offering shelter anymore. He was beginning to hope. The Clary's land lay 4 miles north, past a row of sugar maples that flamed red and gold in the heart of October. Clara rode beside Dallas in the wagon, Jonah bundled against her chest beneath a thick shawl Dallas had found in a cedar chest, its corners worn soft from years of use. The road was rutted from recent rain, and the wheels thumped steady over hardened earth. She kept one hand braced against the bench, the other curved protectively around Jonah's back. "You'll hear the children before you see the house," Dallas said, reins loose in his hands. "They're loud in the way only healthy children can be." Clara turned her head slightly. "Were you like that when you were small?" He shook his head. "Quiet as a stump. My sister made up for both of us. Used to chase the chickens with a broom and holler like she was leading a cavalry charge." Clara smiled faintly. "You ever think about leaving Montana?" "I did once," he said. "After the war. Thought I'd go south, maybe Texas. But something about these valleys held me. The way the light hits the ridges come evening. The smell after a storm. He paused. I never thought I'd come this far west, she said. But now that I'm here, I don't know. It feels like something might grow here if it's given time. They crested a rise, and the Clary homestead came into view. Low stone chimney, smoke trailing, a laundry line flapping in the breeze. Two boys raced across the yard, one with a wooden sword, the other trailing close behind with a flour sack tied around his neck like a cape. Dallas called out as they neared, and a woman stepped out onto the porch, round-bellied and flushed from exertion. She waved them close, smiling with weary welcome. Clary introductions were swift and warm. Mrs. Clary had a voice like warm honey and a grip that held firm even with swollen fingers. Clara caught the look of relief in her eyes when Dallas explained they'd brought help. "She'll be a godsend," Mrs. Clary said, guiding Clara into the kitchen while Dallas stayed to water the horses. "I haven't been able to bend at the waist since last Tuesday, and the boys are half feral." Clara set Jonah down in a basket lined with cotton, then took off her shawl. "I can start with whatever you need most. There's bread to rise, floors to scrub, and hands to keep small fingers out of the fire, Mrs. Clary said with a laugh. "But we'll start with tea. You're not a hired girl, you're a neighbor." They worked through the morning, Clara gently instructing the boys to keep their boots outside, calming the youngest when he fell and scraped his knee. She moved through the small house with growing ease, finding the rhythm of the place. Though the work was constant, it was the kind that filled the mind just enough to quiet it. By late afternoon, Dallas had repaired a broken fence rail and loaded the wagon with carrots and dried beans the Clarys insisted they take as thanks. Clara emerged from the house, cheeks flushed, a small smudge of flour above one brow. "You make a fine impression," Dallas said, taking the basket from her arms and settling Jonah in the wagon. "They made it easy," she said. "Those boys remind me what it is to laugh without thinking." He helped her up onto the bench, then climbed in beside her. The sky was soft with the first signs of dusk. The clouds streaked lavender. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking gently beneath them. "Did you ever picture yourself doing this?" Clara asked, watching a hawk circle above the far field. "Driving a wagon through the Montana hills with a woman and a baby beside me?" He glanced her way. "No, but it's not a picture I mind." She looked down, brushing a stray thread from her skirt. "You could have just let me pass through. You didn't owe me anything." He kept his eyes ahead. "I don't measure things by what's owed." The road narrowed as they passed between two stands of pine. The scent of sap and cold earth filled the air. "I've been thinking," she said, voice low, "about what comes next." Dallas turned his head slightly, waiting. "I want to stay on," she said. "Not just until winter. I want to build something here. I don't know what it looks like yet, but I want Jonah to grow up in a place where he's safe, where he's wanted." He met her gaze and held it. "You'd have that here." The wagon crested a small hill, and the cabin came into view, smoke drifting from its chimney, the yard shadowed by the early dusk. Clara exhaled, slow and steady. "Then I'll stay." Dallas didn't answer. He just reached over and placed his hand lightly over hers on the edge of the bench. His touch was warm, steady, not rushed, not asking anything that hadn't already been freely given. She didn't pull away, and in that quiet moment, beneath the darkening sky, something between them shifted, not sudden, not sharp, but like a door opening just enough to let the light in. The first snow arrived early, fine as sifted flour and quiet as breath. It dusted the roof and fence rails, softened the fields until the whole valley looked like something held in stillness. Clara stood at the cabin window with Jonah in her arms, watching the flakes drift and melt on the sill. He reached out with one small hand, pressing his fingers to the glass. Behind her, Dallas moved with practiced ease, laying another log on the fire. The scent of pine kindling lingered in the room, mingling with the faint sweetness of apples simmering on the stove. He straightened and brushed his palms on his trousers, his gaze catching hers where she stood. "Never seen snow settle so early," she said, rocking Jonah gently. "Back in Kansas, it was always November before it came." "Mountain weather's fickle," he answered, stepping beside her. "Could all melt by morning or hold till spring." Clara shifted Jonah's weight and turned from the window. "We'll be ready either way." Dallas nodded. "We've got enough wood split to last through February, and the Clarys sent word they'll share their root cellar if we need anything more." She smiled at that. "They've been good to us." "We've been good to them," he said. "It's fair trade." Clara walked to the hearth and laid Jonah on the quilted pallet, tucking him in with care. He blinked up at her, then closed his eyes, heavy with sleep. Dallas waited until she turned before speaking again. "Got a letter yesterday," he said, reaching into the pocket of his coat. "From a man I used to ride with, Samuel Tate. He's managing a cattle station down near Virginia City. Wants to hire someone reliable to oversee the spring drive. Offered good money." Clara studied his face. "You thinking of taking it?" "I told him no," Dallas said simply. "I've done enough wandering." She watched him, eyes searching. "You sure?" "I am," he said. "There's work enough here, and better reason to stay now." He stepped closer, his boots making no sound on the worn pine floor. "You gave this place a rhythm I didn't know it was missing. I'd be a fool to walk away from that." Clara's breath caught, but she didn't look away. "I've been waiting to feel like I belong somewhere again, not just passing through, but part of something." Dallas reached out, his hand resting lightly on her waist, fingers steady. "You're not passing through. You're home, if you want it." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked toward the pallet where Jonah slept, his tiny chest rising and falling. Then slowly, she turned back to him. "I want it," she said, voice clear. "I want this life. Here. With you." Dallas lowered his head, and she met him halfway. Their kiss was slow, sure a promise without flourish, rooted in the long days and quiet nights they'd shared. When they parted, her hands rested against his chest, and his forehead pressed gently to hers. The wind picked up outside, brushing the eaves with a soft whistle. But inside, the warmth held, and nothing felt uncertain anymore. That evening, Dallas moved his things up to the loft and built a cradle from birch and brass hinges. Clara lined it with wool she'd carded herself, stitching Jonah's name into the corner with dark blue thread. By the close of the week, they turned the far corner of the barn into a workroom where Clara could sew and mend for neighbors. Word spread quick, and by the end of the month, men from as far as McAllister were bringing her saddlebags and coats to fix. Dallas repaired wagons and kept the fences strong. Come spring, he planned to build a second paddock. One night, as March leaned into April, Clara sat by the fire, Jonah asleep upstairs, the last of the snow melting from the porch roof. Dallas knelt beside her, setting a folded cloth-wrapped bundle in her lap. She opened it slowly. Inside was a ring, simple, silver, and shaped by hand. The band was imperfect, but warm with care. "I can't offer you much," he said, voice low, "but I can offer you a name, a home, and a life where you'll never be turned out again." Clara closed her fingers over the ring. "You've already given me what I thought I'd never have again." They married in June, beneath the same birch where Dallas had buried his sister. Clara wore a blue cotton dress she'd made herself, and Jonah held a sprig of sage in one chubby hand. The Clarys stood beside them, the boys scrubbed and grinning wide. That summer, the valley bloomed tall and green, The garden behind the cabin flourished, and Clara taught Dallas how to preserve peaches in glass jars. At night, they sat on the porch with Jonah between them, listening to crickets and the soft creak of the swing Dallas had built from rope and pine. They didn't speak often of the past. It lived behind them like old weather still there, but no longer pressing against the skin. Their life was not grand, but it was whole, made of shared burdens and gentle mornings, of hands meeting across worn wood, of laughter that grew louder with time. And most of all, it was made of love quiet, steady, and earned, the kind that stayed.